The Still One, Part 1. The Kingdom. She was 17 years old. She weighed maybe 120 pounds soaking wet. She stood 5'4" in her shoes. She had a small bandage on her left wrist that she never explained, and she ate her lunch alone every single day at a corner table with her back against the wall. And on a cold Tuesday morning in October, she walked into Jefferson High School in Portland, Oregon, and three of the most feared students in that building decided she was going to be their next target. By 3:15 that afternoon, all three of them were on the ground. Not because anyone came to help her, not because a teacher finally showed up at the right moment, not because the system worked the way systems are supposed to work, but because of what Zara Cole was, what she had been made into, and what she had spent 3 years learning to control. This is that story. But to understand what happened in those 2 seconds on that cracked concrete slab behind the gymnasium, you need to understand what came before it. You need to understand the world she walked into that morning. You need to understand the kingdom. And kingdoms, no matter how small, no matter whether they're a corporation, a platoon, a factory floor, or a high school in the Pacific Northwest kingdoms, all work the same way. Someone holds the power. Everyone else decides whether to fight it, accept it, or pretend it doesn't exist. Most people pretend. 7 hours earlier, at 7:45 in the morning, the parking lot of Jefferson High was the same organized chaos it was every Tuesday. Cars pulling in at angles that suggested the drivers had somewhere better to be. Buses unloading with that familiar hydraulic hiss. A group of sophomore boys throwing a football across the lawn that nobody was maintaining anymore. A security guard in a reflective vest standing near the main entrance looking at his phone. Normal. Ordinary. A Tuesday in October that looked exactly like every other Tuesday in October. Zara Cole stepped off the city bus at the corner of Morrison and 18th and walked the 2 blocks to the school alone. She'd been doing this for 8 days. 8 mornings of the same 2 block walk. 8 mornings of arriving at 7:45, which was early enough to be in her homeroom before most students arrived, but late enough that she didn't have to stand outside and wait. Timing matters when you are new. Timing matters when you're trying not to be seen. She wore dark jeans and a gray hoodie and carried a backpack that was just full enough to look normal, but not so heavy that it would slow her down. Her hair was pulled back. No jewelry. Nothing that could be grabbed. She walked with her hands loose at her sides. These were not the choices of a typical 17-year-old girl navigating a new school. These were the habits of someone who had learned over a very long time in a very specific program that the difference between a situation you can manage and a situation that manages you comes down to decisions made before anything actually happens. The things you wear, the way you carry yourself, where you position your body in a room, how early you arrive, how clearly you can see every exit. She'd been doing all of it for so long that she didn't think about it anymore. It was like breathing. It was like checking your mirrors when you drive. You just do it because not doing it carries a cost you can't afford. She crossed the parking lot without making eye contact with anyone. She was almost to the front doors when she saw him for the first time that morning. Damon Walsh was 18 years old. He'd been 18 for a year and a half because he'd been held back in his junior year, an event that in most institutions signals a setback, a stumble, a moment of vulnerability. At Jefferson High, it had done the opposite. It had given Damon Walsh an extra year to build what he'd built, an extra year to consolidate what he controlled. He was standing near the side entrance to the main building, shoulders squared, jacket unzipped despite the cold. Reeves Strand stood to his left, phone already out-angled with that casual readiness that meant he wasn't just using it, he was documenting. Callum Briggs stood to his right, a full head taller than Damon Arms, crossed expression, blank in the practiced way of someone who has learned that looking bored is more intimidating than looking angry. Three of them, a formation so familiar it had become architecture. Zara noticed them the way she noticed everything fully immediately and without giving any visible sign that she had. She walked through the front doors. She did not look back. Inside, the hallways of Jefferson High had that particular smell that every public high school in America shares, regardless of geography or decade industrial. Cleaner fighting a losing battle against 500 teenagers' coffee from the teacher's lounge, mixing with something from the cafeteria that was already happening way too early in the morning, and underneath all of it, the faint metallic edge of a building that was older than anyone currently working in it. If you went to high school in America between 1960 and 1990, you know that smell? You don't forget it. It lives somewhere in the back of your memory, alongside the sound of locker doors and the particular squeak of certain gymnasium floors, and the weight of a textbook that was already 10 years out of date when it was handed to you. Zara walked to her locker, worked the combination without looking at it. She'd memorized it on day one and stood with her back to the wall while she switched out her books. From this position, she could see both ends of the hallway. She could see the stairwell to her left and the exit to the side parking lot on her right. She was not being paranoid. She was being precise. There is a difference. She had been a student at Jefferson High for 8 days. In those 8 days, she had mapped the building completely. She knew which hallways had security cameras and which ones didn't. She knew the blind spots. She knew that the corridor connecting the science wing to the gymnasium ran for 60 feet with no camera coverage, no windows, and only one entrance at each end. She knew that the back court, the cracked concrete square behind the gymnasium, with the rusted basketball hoop bent at its permanent wrong angle, had been invisible to school supervision for so long that everyone, students and teachers alike, had simply accepted it as off-limits in both directions. Teachers didn't go there. Students who had business there didn't invite teachers. She knew about the back court because she'd studied the campus the way she'd been taught to study any environment. You learn the terrain before you need it. You don't wait until you're already in the situation. She had also spent 8 days watching Damon Walsh. Not obviously, not in a way that anyone would notice, but watching, cataloging, building the file the way she'd been trained to build files on situations that required management. She knew he ran the back court like a small fiefdom. She knew Reeves Strand served as his media arm, documentation, social distribution, the modern equivalent of a town crier, except the town was a group chat with 400 members. She knew Callum Briggs was the physical element, the presence that made the implicit threat explicit, though in 8 days she hadn't seen him actually touch anyone. The presence was enough. The presence was the whole point. She knew that Damon Walsh had been operating this way for 2 years, which meant that in 2 years no teacher had stopped him, no administrator had removed him, and no student had successfully resisted him. That last fact was the one that mattered most. It told her everything she needed to know about the institution she was standing in. Every institution has an untouchable. It doesn't matter if it's a school, a company, a military unit, or a government agency. There is always someone who exists slightly outside the rules, not because the rules don't apply to them, but because the people responsible for enforcing the rules have, for whatever reason, chosen not to. Maybe it's laziness. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's something more transactional, something that involves favors and phone calls in the particular currency of people who know people. The untouchable always knows they're untouchable. That's what makes them dangerous. It's not the strength, it's the certainty. Damon Walsh moved through Jefferson High with the absolute certainty of someone who has tested the limits of his environment repeatedly and found that there are none. Zara understood this. She had walked into situations shaped exactly this way before. She closed her locker. She went to homeroom. She sat in the back corner desk position so she could see both the door and the window. She opened her notebook. She did not write anything about the date or the weather or the things that most 17-year-olds record in their notebooks. She wrote 3 words at the top of the page in small, precise handwriting. Then she drew a line under them and began outlining the day. If you'd looked over her shoulder and read those 3 words, you might have thought they were a homework reminder or a personal note. They were neither. They were a decision she'd been building toward for 8 days. A decision she made every morning when she woke up in her new apartment, in a new city, in a new school that was in all the ways that mattered exactly like the last one. The 3 words were, I don't run. Homeroom lasted 12 minutes. Zara sat through it without speaking to anyone, which was normal. She never spoke to anyone in homeroom. Not because she was unfriendly, because she was careful, and those 2 things look identical from the outside, but feel completely different from the inside. There was a girl named Sloane Merritt who sat 2 rows over and sometimes looked in Zara's direction with an expression that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite recognition and wasn't quite the hostility that most students had settled into. It was something else, something Zara had filed and not yet categorized. Sloane had brown hair and quiet hands, in the particular way of holding herself in a room, shoulders slightly in attention, slightly down, that Zara recognized as the posture of someone who had learned the same lesson Zara had learned, except they'd learned it without any of the training. They'd learned it the hard way, which is the way most people learn it, and the way that leaves the deepest marks. When the homeroom bell rang, Sloane gathered her books and left without looking at Zara again. The day began. The first period bell rang at 8:15. American History, Mr. Harris's room, 2nd floor, East Wing. Zara was among the first students through the door, which meant she had her choice of seats. She chose the back corner, the desk where the wall met the window, and she could see the door and most of the room without turning her head. Mr. Harris was the kind of teacher who had been doing this long enough that the energy had left the performance of it. He lectured from notes that hadn't changed significantly in several years, speaking to a point somewhere above the heads of his students with the practiced rhythm of a man who knew the material so well, he didn't need to think about it anymore, which meant he also didn't need to pay close attention to the room he was in. Students had learned to use this. Damon Walsh sat 3 rows ahead of Zara and slightly to the left. He turned around twice in the first 10 minutes, not quickly, not obviously, just the slow, deliberate pivot of someone who wants you to know they're watching you. He smiled both times. The smile of someone who believes they have already won, who has run this particular calculation so many times that the answer has become automatic. Zara did not react. She wrote nothing in her notebook about the Civil War or Gettysburg or the military strategy Mr. Harris was describing. She watched Damon Walsh the way you watch weather, not with fear, not with anger, but with the steady attention of someone who needs accurate information. 20 minutes into the lecture, Mr. Harris asked a question about battlefield logistics during the Peninsula Campaign. Before anyone else could respond, Damon raised his hand. Mr. Harris nodded. Damon did not answer the question. He turned in his seat instead, slowly theatrically, with one arm draped over the back of his chair, and gestured toward Zara with the relaxed magnanimity of someone giving a gift. "I think our new student should answer," he said. His voice was pleasant, reasonable. The voice of someone who has learned that the most effective cruelty sounds like politeness. She sits in the back and judges everyone. Seems like she might know a few things. The laughter that moved through the room was not loud. It was the quiet, compliant laughter of people who have learned that laughing is safer than not laughing. The laughter of a kingdom. Mr. Harris frowned. "That's enough, Damon." "I'm just saying." Damon spread his hand, still reasonable, still pleasant. "She's been here a week, hasn't talked to anyone, hasn't looked at anyone. Either she's better than all of us or she's got something to hide." A pause. "I'm genuinely curious which one it is." More laughter. Students turning in their seats to look at Zara, some with amusement, some with the particular discomfort of people who are glad it's not them. Zara met Damon's eyes. She did not look away, did not shift in her seat, did not give him the flicker of reaction he was looking for. The embarrassment, the anger, the fear. Any of the responses that would have fed whatever this performance was supposed to feed. She simply looked at him. The silence stretched 3 seconds, 4, 5. Then she answered Mr. Harris's question. Correctly, completely, in 2 sentences, without notes, without hesitation. She did not look away from Damon Walsh while she answered it. Mr. Harris blinked, cleared his throat, continued the lecture. Damon turned back to face the front of the room. The smile had changed. It was still there, but it was working harder than it had been a minute ago. When the bell rang, Zara stood and began gathering her things. She was almost to the door when she heard his footsteps behind her, unhurried, deliberate, time to arrive at her shoulder before she could exit. She'd been tracking the sound since he scraped his chair back. She knew exactly where he was. He leaned down, palms flat on the desk she just vacated, bringing his face close to hers. His voice dropped to something that only she could hear. "You know what your problem is?" She looked at him. Nothing on her face. "You think being quiet makes you strong," he said, "but quiet just means nobody hears you scream." He straightened up, smiled one more time, walked out. Zara looked down at the desk. 2 palm prints, faint but visible, pressed into the surface of the paper she'd left behind. She tore the page out of her notebook, folded it once, dropped it in the trash can on her way to second period. She did not think about what he'd said. She thought about what he'd revealed. Between second and third period, the hallway connecting the English wing to the main corridor was its usual compressed chaos, 4 minutes, 500 students. The institutional arithmetic that means someone is always going to be too close to someone else, moving in the wrong direction, creating the minor friction that makes hallways feel like something between a river and a very slow collision. Zara moved through it the way she moved through everything, steady, aware, taking up exactly as much space as she needed and no more. That was when the backpack hit the floor. She felt it before she fully processed it, the sudden absence of weight on her shoulder, the sound of the impact, the scatter of objects across linoleum. She stopped moving, looked down. Notebooks, pens, her water bottle rolling until it hit the wall of paperbacks she'd been carrying for 3 days without reading. She did not flinch, did not cry out, did not look at the foot that had connected with the strap. A voice behind her warm with amusement, carrying the careful projection of someone who wants an audience. Oops. Damon Walsh. Reeves Strand to his left, phone out angled down. Callum Briggs to his right, arms crossed filling the space beside Damon, the way a wall fills a room, not actively threatening, simply present, in a way that closed off the geometry of the situation. Damon stepped closer and crushed one of her pens under his shoe. The plastic cracked like a small bone. "You're the new girl," he said, not a question. Zara bent down slowly. She kept her back angled toward the wall, not against it, just near enough that she couldn't be approached from behind. She began picking up her scattered belongings, deliberately, unhurried. She picked up each item and returned it to her bag without rushing, without looking up. The notebook first, then the water bottle, then the second pen, the one he hadn't stepped on. Then the paperback, which had landed face down and bent one of the pages, in which she straightened carefully before placing it in the bag. Damon watched this with the particular irritation of someone whose script is being ignored. People were supposed to scramble. People were supposed to apologize, to gather their things in a panicked rush, to look up at him with the eyes that confirmed what he already knew about this transaction. The quiet efficiency happening 3 feet below him was not in the script. He crouched down to her level, close enough that she could smell the energy drink on his breath. "When I talk to you," he said quietly, "you answer. When I ask a question, you respond. That's how this works." Zara zipped her backpack, stood up, and for the first time she met his eyes directly, fully, without the slight downward angle that passes for non-confrontation. "Give me back my pen," she said. She barely spoke above a whisper. But the complete absence of fear has its own frequency. It carries in ways that volume doesn't. Damon blinked. He looked down at the crushed pen under his shoe, looked back at her face, scanning for the crack in her composure that must exist somewhere, the fault line that pressure would eventually find. He found nothing. "Your pen," he said slowly. "Yes." A short laugh. He looked at Reeve, confirmation that yes, this was as absurd as it seemed. Reeve tilted the phone to get a better angle, the red light already blinking. "You want your broken pen back?" "Yes." He kicked the fragments toward her feet. "There. Happy now?" Zara looked at the pieces on the floor. She did not pick them up. Her eyes moved back to his face. "No," she said. The word landed in the hallway like a stone dropped in still water. The small crowd that had formed, and there was always a small crowd there, was always an audience for these transactions, went quieter. Reeves stopped moving the phone. Callum uncrossed and recrossed his arms. Damon's smile faded by degrees, the way a light fades when the power source starts struggling. Something shifted in his expression, not fear, not yet, but the early signal of something he hadn't encountered before, and didn't have a name for. He reached toward her face, not to strike her, not a blow, just a reach. The casual violation of personal space that is its own form of dominance, the gesture that says, "I can touch you if I want to, and there's nothing you'll do about it." Zara's hand came up. Not fast, not aggressive, just present. Her palm met his wrist before his fingers reached her cheek. She did not push, did not grab. She redirected his arm downward with a motion so subtle that if you'd been watching from 10 feet away, you might have thought you imagined it. A slight change in the angle of momentum. Nothing more. Damon stumbled forward a half step. He hadn't been pushed. He wasn't sure what had happened. His arm had simply gone in a direction he hadn't intended, and his body had followed, and now he was half a step off his center and facing a girl who was still standing exactly where she'd been standing, balanced, watching him with those dark level eyes. 2 seconds of absolute silence. Then Damon yanked his arm back. His face had gone the particular red that lives between embarrassment and anger, the color of something that hasn't decided yet what it wants to be. "Lucky." His voice carried a roughness that hadn't been there before. "That was lucky." Zara adjusted the strap of her backpack on her shoulder. "Give me back my phone," she said. Silence. "What, my phone?" Her voice remained flat, observational, the tone of someone describing a fact about the weather. "You took it from my bag while I was picking up my things. Front right pocket of your jacket." Reeves' hand went still. The phone was still up, but the practiced, casual angle was gone, replaced by the involuntary freeze of someone whose brain has just received information that doesn't compute. Callum's eyes moved slowly from Damon to Zara and back. Damon's hand moved toward the pocket she'd identified, then stopped. The hand hung in the air for a moment, neither moving forward nor pulling back, like it was waiting for instructions from somewhere that wasn't responding. "How did you give it back?" The word "please" came after it, procedural, required the way you say certain words, not because you feel them, but because they are part of the process. Please. Damon reached into his jacket pocket. He could smash it. He could throw it down the hall. He could put it back in his own pocket and simply dare her to do anything about it. The options existed. He thought about them briefly the way you think about a road you've decided not to take. Instead, he held it out. Zara took it. Their fingers did not touch. Something had shifted, and everyone present could feel it, even if no one could have articulated exactly what it was. The air in the hallway had changed temperature. The power equation that these interactions run on the one so familiar that it operates below conscious thought had somewhere in the last 90 seconds produced a result that nobody recognized. Damon recovered the smile. It was a lesser version of itself, but it was there. After school, his voice came back loud enough for the remaining witnesses. Back court, 3:15. You and me are going to have a real conversation about respect. Zara looked at him. Fine, she said. No argument, no negotiation, no performance of fear or defiance, just acceptance. The word landing flat and simple, like a period at the end of a sentence. Damon stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away. He snapped his fingers once and Reeve and Callum followed. Zara watched until they turned the corner. Then she looked down at the crushed pen fragments scattered across the linoleum at her feet. She did not pick them up. She went to class. The cafeteria at Jefferson High seated 400 students and smelled like reheated pasta, an industrial citrus cleaner, and the accumulated residue of 10,000 lunches that had happened in this same room over the past 15 years. At 11:45 on a Tuesday morning, it was running at capacity. Zara carried her lunch from home, a sandwich and apple, a water bottle that was not the one that had rolled across the hallway floor that morning. She found her usual table in the far corner, the one with the clear sight line to all 4 exits. She sat with her back to the wall. The tables around her were empty. Not accidentally. Word travels fast in closed systems. Word about the hallway. Word about the pen. Word about whatever had happened to Damon's face in that moment when a girl who didn't exist online had said the word no and then said the word fine and had somehow in the span of 5 minutes made the most powerful student in Jefferson High look like he was doing the catching up. People kept their distance, not out of hostility, out of the instinct that keeps civilians away from the center of a situation they don't understand and don't want to be part of. A girl at the next table, Zara had seen her before, quiet, watchful, the same practiced smallness of someone who had learned to take up minimum space, glanced over twice. On the third glance, she started to rise from her seat, some intention forming some impulse towards something that might have been solidarity or curiosity or simply the specific loneliness of recognizing a quality in someone else that you know costs something to carry. Her friend grabbed her arm and pulled her back down, shook her head. Small, urgent. The girl sat back down, looked at her tray, did not look toward Zara again. That girl was Sloane Merritt. Zara had noted her during homeroom, was still building the file. She ate her sandwich. She watched the room without appearing to watch it. She counted exits the way other people count calories automatically without thinking about it, the habit worn into her nervous system so deep it had become part of how she processed space. 4 exits, 2 main doors at the south end, a service entrance behind the kitchen usually propped open, a fire door at the north end alarm disabled by someone who'd done it so long ago that nobody remembered the reason. One teacher monitoring 300 students. Phone in hand, Callum Briggs appeared from the direction of the main serving line. He didn't sit down. He stopped at the edge of her table tray in hand and stood there with the theatrical timing of someone who has rehearsed this. He looked down at her lunch with exaggerated interest the way a child looks at something they're about to declare inferior. Brought your own food. Not a question, a performance. What our cafeteria not good enough for you? Zara did not respond, took another bite of her sandwich. I asked you a question. She lifted her water bottle, drank, set it back down. Callum's jaw tightened. His eyes swept the nearest table's confirmation of audience confirmation that this was being seen, that the performance had witnesses. Without that, none of it means anything. Without the witnesses, you're just a large person standing alone next to a table. He tipped the tray. It was not a fumble. It was deliberate and controlled and targeted. The spaghetti and red sauce came down in a concentrated pour mostly onto the surface of the table, some across Zara's notebook, some landing at the edge of her sandwich, the tray itself clattering against the table surface with a sound that cut through the cafeteria noise and pulled every head in the room toward the corner. The cafeteria went quiet. Not completely, sound still happened. Somewhere a chair scraped, somewhere a phone played something, but the conversational layer dropped away in an instant, leaving 400 students in a room that had suddenly become a single audience, looking at a single stage. Zara looked at the mess, her notebook, her hands, her lunch. She stood up slowly. She picked up a napkin from the dispenser on the table, and she wiped the sauce from her fingers, methodically, carefully. Starting with her right index finger and working outward, the napkin moving with the steady rhythm of someone completing a task that has a correct procedure and a correct result and nothing else. She did not look at Callum. She did not look at the crowd. She wiped her hands, folded the napkin, placed it on the table. Then she gathered what remained of her lunch, the apple, undamaged the water bottle, and placed them in her bag. The ruined sandwich went into the trash. The sauce-stained notebook pages she removed carefully and placed in the trash as well. Then she walked to the exit. The crowd parted for her. Not dramatically, not consciously, just the involuntary step backward that people take when something moves through a space with a particular kind of certainty. She didn't look at anyone. Callum stood frozen behind her tray, still in hand, the physical situation he had created, now resolved in a direction he hadn't planned for and didn't know how to respond to. He had the audience. He had the laugh. Phones were out. Content was being made. But the girl had given him nothing. Not the breakdown, not the tears, not the scramble for dignity that would have meant he'd actually reached something real. She'd simply left. Someone near the back whispered it loud enough to carry. What's wrong with her? Callum had no answer. In the corner far enough that nobody had been watching her, Sloane Merritt's hand had been moving for the past 45 seconds. Her phone angled toward the table, the cafeteria scene playing out in her frame. Callum's approach, the deliberate tip of the tray, the red sauce, the crowd's silence. Zara's methodical response, her departure through the crowd that parted without knowing it was parting. Sloane kept recording after Zara left. She tracked Callum and Reeve with the camera while her eyes stayed on her tray, and in doing so she held the angle across the cafeteria floor past the secondary exit doorway toward the corridor running between the serving area and the gymnasium wing. She didn't know yet what was in that frame. She wouldn't know until much later that afternoon when she finally reviewed what she had. She lowered the phone when Callum moved away. She put it in her pocket. She looked down at her tray for a long moment with the expression of someone who has been sitting on something for 2 years and has just without planning started to stand up. 20 minutes later, Zara sat in a bathroom stall near the gymnasium corridor cleaning sauce from her notebook's back cover with wet paper towels. Her hands moved efficiently. No wasted motion. She did not crem on. She did what she'd been trained to do in the time between incidents, in the spaces where nothing was actively happening. She cataloged. Callum Briggs needs external validation, performance dependent, will escalate if ignored but requires an audience to do it. Unlikely to act alone. The threat he represents is structural, not personal. Remove the structure and the threat disperses with it. She folded the paper towels, dropped them in the small trash receptacle. She looked at her left wrist. The bandage was still there, small and white and unremarkable. She had been wearing some version of it for 7 months. She thought about the hallway from that morning, Damon's hand reaching toward her face and the instinct that had come up to meet it, not fast, not aggressive, just present, just there. The response that 3 years of training had built into her nervous system so thoroughly that it now preceded conscious thought by half a second. She thought about how her hand had trembled afterward. Not from fear, from the effort of stopping at redirection. From the practiced restraint of someone who knows what comes after redirection, if you let it continue, and who has spent a very long time learning to stop before that. The cost of that stopping lives in the trembling. She had learned to make peace with the trembling. She stood up, straightened her jacket, put her bag on her shoulder, and opened the stall door. She had a 1:15 class in the English wing. There was a window in that classroom that overlooked the back court. She had noticed it on her first day. She had noted the sight line, the angle, the distance. She had also noted that morning when Damon made his announcement when he said 3:15 backcourt, his voice carrying the comfortable projection of someone accustomed to making announcements that become facts. She had noted that Ms. Caldwell was standing at the far end of the hallway. And Mrs. Caldwell had heard every word. And Ms. Caldwell had not moved. Not toward Damon, not toward Zara. Not toward the small crowd that had formed and dissolved. She had simply stood there at the far end of the hallway, and her expression had contained something that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite resignation. It was something closer to recognition. Zara had filed this and moved on. She filed everything and moved on. That was the whole system. The corridor connecting the gymnasium wing to the main building runs 60 feet with no camera coverage and no foot traffic in the 20 minutes before the lunch period ends. Zara used it as a route back from the bathroom because it was direct and because direct was always preferable to the long way when she had 3 minutes before the bell. She was halfway through it when she heard steps behind her, single set, closing fast, the pace of purpose. She didn't stop walking. She adjusted the angle of her awareness, the way you adjust a dial, not alarm, just attention sharper than before, the instrument tuned to the frequency of this specific corridor at this specific time. Damon Walsh fell into step behind her and then closed the remaining distance and put his hand on her shoulder. She stopped. She turned. He was alone. No Reeve with a camera. No Callum filling the space beside him. Just Damon in this corridor with 11 minutes left before the afternoon bell, his expression carrying the harder register that lived underneath the performance version, more focused, less theatrical, the face he showed when there was no audience to calibrate for. "Between you and me," he said. His voice was quieter here than it was in hallways. "You should think very carefully about this afternoon." Zara looked at him. "You grabbed me," she said. "Yeah." He didn't release her shoulder. "And there's nobody here to see it." Her right hand came up slowly. She placed it over his wrist, not gripping, not applying pressure, just resting there with the flat, even contact of someone who knows exactly what they're doing and is choosing deliberately not to do more than this. "You should let go," she said. 3 seconds. He released her shoulder and stepped back. Not because she had forced him, the way a hand releases when some signal from somewhere decides the cost of holding on is no longer worth paying. He stepped back and his face reorganized itself around something that was trying to be amusement and wasn't quite landing. 3:15, he said. "Don't make me come find you." He walked back toward the main building without hurrying. His footsteps echoed off the concrete walls and then disappeared around the corner. Zara remained where she was. She filed it. A brief contact near the gymnasium wing exit released immediately no witnesses present. Posturing. A preview same as he had said meant to establish terms for the afternoon rather than to accomplish anything in itself. The kind of move that someone makes when they want you thinking about what's coming rather than what's happening right now. She filed it and walked to class. What she didn't know because she couldn't have known was that the corridor she'd just been standing in was visible through the secondary exit doorway that opened off the cafeteria, a sightline that existed at an oblique angle, imperfect, the kind of view that nobody looks for because nobody knows to look for it. Nobody except a girl with a phone who had kept recording after everyone else had looked away. The English wing classroom at 1:15 was warm enough that 3 students in the back had fallen asleep by the time Mrs. Atwood finished her analysis of a Hemingway short story, the one about a man in a foreign country who has to make a decision about something he cannot undo. The one about grace under pressure. The one where the character's silence carries more weight than anything he says. Zara stared out the window. The back court was visible from here. Cracked concrete, one rusted hoop bent at its permanent wrong angle. Chain link fence on 3 sides, gymnasium wall on the 4th. Empty now in the flat afternoon light. In 90 minutes it would not be empty. Mrs. Atwood asked a question about the protagonist's motivation. The classroom waited with the collective, vague attention of people who were present but not quite there. Zara answered it without looking away from the window. She answered correctly. Completely. In 2 sentences. The protagonist's motivation, she said, was not survival. It was dignity. There's a difference, but they look the same from the outside, and most people never figure out which one they're actually fighting for until it's too late to choose. Mrs. Atwood paused. Said yes. That's exactly right. Went back to the lecture. Zara went back to the window. She thought about the back court, the dimensions she'd already memorized. The afternoon sun at 3:15 in October comes in low, and from the west, which means it would be in Damon's eyes if he was facing east. Reeve would be to the left. Callum would take the door, the only exit, because that's how they'd position themselves every time she'd observed this pattern. Close the exit first. Basic containment. Instinctive for people who do this regularly even when they don't know they're doing it. 3 people. An enclosed space. 2 years of uncontested authority on one side. She thought about what she'd said in that corridor 40 minutes ago. The words that had come out without being planned. You should let go. And she thought about what came before Jefferson High, before Portland, before the small apartment 3 miles from here where her caseworker checked in every other Tuesday. She thought about the school before this one, the boy in the empty classroom, the 7 months since, She did not replay the incident itself. She had made that rule, and she kept it because keeping it was cheaper than the alternative. But she thought about the aftermath, the office, the voice behind the door, the counselor who had come out carrying something she didn't want to be carrying, the language they'd used, mutual altercation, transfer agreement, the understanding that a school's liability runs toward whoever holds more currency in the system, and that Zara Cole's continued presence had been, from an administrative perspective, a problem solved most efficiently by her absence. She had packed her things and come to Portland. She had written 3 words in a notebook every morning since, "I don't run." Not because running wasn't an option. It was always an option. She knew the bus schedules. She knew Mr. Dunleavy's number. She knew the process for requesting a new placement. She'd been through it once already, and the institutional machinery of it was familiar enough that she could navigate it with her eyes closed. But running had a cost she'd been paying for 7 months, in the way she sat in rooms, and the way she moved through parking lots, and the way she cataloged every space she entered before she allowed herself to exist inside it. Running had a cost that looked from the outside like vigilance, that felt from the inside like a life spent managing exits. She had come to Portland to learn to be in a room without processing it. She was not there yet, but she was here. She looked out at the empty back court, and she drew a line in her notebook under the question she hadn't written. Mrs. Atwood's voice moved through the warm classroom. Grace under pressure, what the words leave out. How silence on the page does the same thing as silence in a room. It carries weight that nothing explicit could carry. At 2:50, Miss Caldwell was waiting in the hallway outside English. Zara saw her when she came through the door. The counselor stood with her arms crossed, her lanyard swinging slightly in the draft from the corridor, not waiting for anyone else. Her eyes found Zara immediately. The expression on her face was the expression of a woman who has spent 11 years in the same institution, learning to see the things that institutions tend to produce and would prefer not to look at directly. "We need to talk," Ms. Caldwell said. Zara looked at the clock above the classroom door, 23 minutes until 3:15. "I have somewhere to be," Zara said. "The back court." Ms. Caldwell didn't move. "I know." The hallway moved around them, students in both directions, the particular Tuesday afternoon energy of people already halfway to wherever they were going. "I've been counselor here for 11 years, Ms. Caldwell said. Her voice was not loud. It was the voice of someone who has learned that volume and authority are different things. "I know what happens there. I know who runs it. And I know that walking in there alone against 3 of them means the odds are not in your favor." Zara met her eyes. "Then you know I don't have a choice." "There's always a choice. Not the kind you're thinking of." Zara shifted her bag on her shoulder. "If I run, he follows. If I hide, he finds me. If I report it, he denies everything, and I spend the rest of the year being the girl who made things complicated for no result." A pause. "I've done all 3. None of them worked." Ms. Caldwell studied her for a long moment. She had made calls that morning. Routine at first, new transfer students had files that preceded them, and sometimes the files were thin by design, and thin files had a particular shape that 11 years had taught her to recognize. She'd been transferred twice before reaching someone who would say anything substantive, and even then the conversation had been careful, leaving most of the space between the words empty in a way that said more than the words themselves. She had enough. "You're not a typical student," she said. "No. I made some calls today." Something moved in Zara's eyes, not fear, something more like resignation, the expression of someone who has been found before and knows what finding usually costs. "I'm not going to tell anyone," Miss Caldwell said quietly. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" "It's me telling you that I know you can handle yourself, and also telling you that handling yourself has a cost that you've already paid once, and that I'd rather find another way than watch you pay it again." The clock moved. 21 minutes. Zara's right hand moved toward her left wrist, rested there for a moment over the bandage. She looked down at it. "The last time I didn't have control," she said, "I broke a boy's arm in 2 places. He had surgery. He had 6 months of physical therapy." A pause. "He had cornered me in an empty classroom and put his hands on me, and I had told him to stop, and he hadn't. And none of that changed what I'd done, or how the school saw it, or why I'm standing here instead of there." Ms. Caldwell was quiet. "So when you ask me how I can be sure I won't lose control." Zara looked up. "That's how. Because I remember what losing it costs. And because I've been practicing every day for 7 months to make sure I have something to pay with besides that." The hallway moved around them. The clock moved. Ms. Caldwell looked at her for a long moment with the full, steady look of someone deciding whether to step forward or step back. Then she said, "I'll be nearby." Not "I'll stop it," not "I'll call someone." Not the institutional response that would require forms and protocols. And all the machinery that had, in Zara's experience, never once produced the result it was supposed to produce. Just "I'll be nearby." Zara nodded once, moved past her toward the stairwell. She did not run. She walked the way she always walked. Steady, deliberate, hands loose at her sides, toward the back of the building, toward the gymnasium, toward the cracked concrete court where Damon Walsh was already waiting. The afternoon light came through the stairwell windows at a low angle, casting long shadows across the steps. Outside, the last buses were pulling away from the front of the school, carrying students toward wherever Tuesday afternoons took them, normal life proceeding on schedule. She pushed through the door at the bottom of the stairs. She had 12 minutes. She had been ready for 8 days. She pushed through the fire door at 3:14. The alarm had been disabled years ago. Nobody remembered who had done it or when, or whether anyone had ever been asked about it formally. It was simply one of those facts about an institution that accumulates over time: a dead alarm on a back door, a security camera that stopped recording and was never replaced, a corner of a building that fell off the map of official concern so gradually that the falling happened without anyone deciding it should. The backcourt opened before her, 60 feet by 40 feet of cracked concrete that hadn't been repaired since at least the previous decade. Weeds pushing through the gaps in the surface with the particular persistence of things that grow where they aren't wanted. The basketball lines faded to the point where you had to know they were there to see them. One rusted hoop at the far end, bent at the angle of something that had given up on its original purpose. Chain link fence on 3 sides. The gymnasium wall on the 4th. No windows overlooking this space. No cameras recording it. No sight line from any point of official supervision in the entire building. She had known all of this since her 3rd day at Jefferson High. She stood just inside the fire door and let it close behind her and took inventory the way she always took inventory. Distances first. The fence on the north side was approximately 30 feet from where she stood. The east fence was closer, 22, maybe 23 feet. The gymnasium wall behind her was solid, no openings except the door she'd come through. The afternoon sun came in low from the west, lighting the far half of the court in flat, pale gold, and leaving the near half in the long shadow of the gymnasium roof. Wind, a cold, steady pressure from the northwest, maybe 15 miles per hour, enough to affect anything thrown or projected. Not relevant to what was about to happen, but she noted it anyway. She took her position in the center of the court, 8 feet forward from the door, far enough from the fence that she had room on 3 sides. Close enough to the door that Callum Briggs, when he arrived to block it, would need to come to her to close that distance rather than simply standing in the doorway and making the gap between them irrelevant. Small advantages. The arithmetic of small advantages is the only arithmetic that matters when the numbers aren't in your favor. She set her backpack down, adjusted her jacket, stood with her feet shoulder-width apart and her hands loose at her sides, and waited. She had approximately 60 seconds. She used them to go back to the hallway. 18 minutes earlier. The corridor connecting the science wing to the gymnasium runs 60 feet with a 90-degree turn at each end, no windows, no camera coverage. And during the period between the 6th period bell and the start of after-school activities, it carries almost no traffic. Students going from the science wing to anywhere else have learned to use the main corridor. Teachers don't cut through here. It is in the most complete sense of the phrase unsupervised space. She had known this too. She had been moving through it with deliberate purpose. At 2:45, 4 minutes after Ms. Caldwell had said, "I'll be nearby," and she had turned toward the stairwell and started walking. She'd taken the long route, partly to put more time between herself and the back court before arriving, partly because the long route passed through the library corridor where she could check the clock without seeming to check it. She was 40 feet into the gymnasium corridor when the hand came down on her shoulder. She had heard the footsteps, had clocked them 15 feet behind her as she entered the corridor, single set mail the pace of someone moving with purpose rather than someone going somewhere. She had cataloged this and kept walking because there were still several possible explanations, and none of them required response until the situation clarified itself. It clarified itself at 40 feet. The hand was not heavy, it was deliberate. The particular weight of a hand that wants you to understand it's there, that wants you to feel the choice it's making by touching you. She turned. Damon Walsh stood alone. No Reeve, no Callum, no phone, no audience, no performance. Just him in this empty corridor in the 23 minutes before whatever was going to happen behind the gymnasium. He'd come alone because alone was different from what happened in hallways with crowds. Alone meant something that could be denied. Alone meant no record, no witnesses, no version of events except the one told by whoever had more credibility afterward. And in the institutional calculus of Jefferson High, that had always meant whoever wasn't the new girl. He stepped closer. His grip on her shoulder tightened by degrees, not painful, but present, inescapable, the grip of someone establishing terms. "Thought I'd give you a preview," he said. His voice was quieter here than it was in hallways, more careful. The performance calibrated for a different kind of audience, an audience of one, no witnesses to impress, just the transaction itself. "So you know what's coming." She did not pull away. Her feet shifted almost imperceptibly, weight redistributing, without visible movement, settling toward a different center. "You grabbed me," she said. "Yeah." He looked at her evenly. "And nobody's here to see it. No cameras in this hallway. Just you and me." She raised her right hand slowly, placed it over his wrist. Not grabbing, not gripping, just resting there with the flat, steady pressure of something that knows exactly what it's doing. "You should let go," she said. He laughed, the laugh of someone certain about the terms of the room they're in. The laugh that had worked for 2 years in every room he'd walked into. "Tough talk. You're half my size." But his eyes had gone to her hand on his wrist, just briefly, just a flicker. "You should let go," she said again. 3 seconds. He released her shoulder and stepped back. Not because she had forced him. His grip had simply released. The way a hand releases when some signal from somewhere decides the cost of holding on is no longer worth paying. He stepped back, and his face reorganized itself around the smile, but the smile was working harder than usual, and they both knew it. 3:15, he said. "Don't make me come find you." He walked back toward the turn in the corridor without hurrying. His footsteps echoed off the concrete walls and then disappeared around the corner, and the corridor was quiet. Zara stayed where she was. After approximately 4 seconds, her right hand began to tremble, not violently, not in a way anyone standing 5 feet away would have noticed. A fine, controlled tremor that started at the wrist and moved toward the fingers, the involuntary discharge of something that had been held very still for a sustained period and was now briefly allowed to be something other than still. This was not fear. She had learned in 3 years of a very specific kind of training in a facility in northern Washington that she had not returned to in 7 months, that the trembling after restraint was not the same thing as the trembling before action. One was the body preparing, the other was the body paying. She took 3 breaths, deep and even, the specific rhythm she had been taught, not because breathing was complicated, but because 3 deliberate breaths creates a pause long enough for the nervous system to receive the message that the situation has passed and the hell thing can be released. The trembling stopped. She lowered her hand. She stood in the empty corridor for a moment longer, and she thought about what Ms. Caldwell had said that afternoon when she'd briefly, carefully said almost nothing while saying enough. She thought about what it meant that a school counselor had made calls and found files and reached someone who knew what the Phoenix program was and what it did to the children who went through it. The Phoenix program was not classified. It was not secret in any government sense of the word. It was a federally funded residential intervention program for minors who had experienced severe domestic trauma, children who had come out of situations that left standard trauma therapies insufficient, whose nervous systems had been calibrated by their circumstances toward a vigilance and a reactivity that made conventional schooling dangerous for everyone involved, including themselves. The program ran for typically 2 to 4 years. It used a combination of therapeutic counseling and what its documentation called adaptive resilience training, a term that translated in practice to teaching traumatized children how to be safe in their own bodies, how to understand the fight-or-flight system that trauma had overclocked, how to work with it instead of against it, how to redirect the energy that abuse had built into them towards something that looked like control rather than something that looked like a lit fuse. The program had 12 residential facilities across 6 states. Zara had spent 3 years in the one in northern Washington. She had arrived there at 14 after Child Protective Services removed her from a situation that the case file described in language specifically designed to be clinical and therefore survivable to read. She had left the program at 17, graduated was the word they used, with a full scholarship to a public school in Portland and a caseworker named Mr. Dunleavy who checked in on Tuesdays, and a set of skills that the program's literature described as tools for self-advocacy and de-escalation. What the literature did not say what was true anyway was that the adaptive resilience training, when it went far enough, and when the student was serious enough, and when 3 years of work had built it into the body completely enough, produced something that was not well described by the phrase tools for self-advocacy and de-escalation. It produced something more like what Zara Cole was. She did not think of herself as dangerous. She thought of herself as expensive. She thought of herself as someone who had been given a specific set of capabilities at a specific cost, and who carried that cost in the bandage on her left wrist, and in the way she sat in rooms, and in the precise, sustained effort of remembering every single time that capability is not the same as permission. The last time she had forgotten that distinction, a boy named Marcus Webb had needed surgery and 6 months of physical therapy. Marcus Webb had cornered her in an empty classroom in her previous school, had locked the door, had said things and then tried to do things after the saying hadn't worked. She had told him to stop, twice clearly using words she had been taught to use in exactly this kind of situation. He had not stopped, and she could feel it even now in this empty corridor in Portland. 7 months later, she had felt the training take over in the way that training takes over, when the practiced response is finally met with the situation it was built for. Clean and fast and utterly without hesitation, the way a muscle memory completes its movement before the thinking brain catches up. She had broken his arm in 2 places. The school had framed it the way schools frame things when the alternative framing creates more paperwork. The official language was mutual altercation. The consequence was a transfer agreement that relocated Zara Cole to Portland, Oregon before the end of the semester, and that was written in language specific enough to be enforceable and vague enough to be unprovable. Marcus Webb's father played golf with the superintendent. She had learned again the same thing she had first learned at 14, that institutions are machines, that machines do not have values, that machines have only inputs and outputs, and the output you get depends entirely on who controls the input. She had not told Ms. Caldwell all of this. She had told Ms. Caldwell a version of it, the shape of it, the bones without the flesh. Enough for the counselor to understand what she was standing in front of when she was standing in front of Zara Cole. And Ms. Caldwell had said, "I'll be nearby," which was in Zara's experience more than most people offered. She had left the corridor and gone to the back court. At 3:15, Damon Walsh came through the fire door with Reeve Strand and Callum Briggs. She had heard them coming 30 seconds before they arrived. Voices in the corridor, the specific tone of men who are not having a conversation, but are instead warming themselves up, building the energy of a thing they have done before and are about to do again with confidence. They came through the door in formation. Damon in front center, Reeve to the left, phone already raised the red light active. Callum to the right, moving immediately toward the fire door, taking his position in front of it, without being instructed, the habit of someone who has done this enough times that the choreography is automatic. 3 people. The door covered. The court enclosed on all sides. Damon walked forward until he was 10 feet from Zara. He looked at her in the center of the court, standing with her backpack down and her hands open and her feet settled, and something moved across his face, a brief, barely visible adjustment, the face of a man encountering a detail that doesn't quite match the template. He recovered it quickly. "You actually showed up." Genuine surprise, just enough of it to be real. "Most people run." "I know," Zara said. He circled her, slowly moving in a wide arc, footsteps echoing off the fence, his hands loose at his sides. The orbit of someone establishing ownership of a space, conducting a survey of something he intends to acquire. "Here's how this works," he said. He completed the circle and returned to his starting position. "You apologize, publicly, loudly, in front of as many people as Reeve can get on this call right now." He glanced at Reeve, who adjusted the phone angle. "And then you pay the new student tax. $20 a week. Protection." "A protection from who?" His smile widened. "From me." Zara looked at him steadily. "Counter offer," she said, the smile held. He spread his hands in invitation. "Walk away right now, all 3 of you. Pretend today didn't happen. Leave me alone for the rest of the year." The laughter came fast. All 3 of them, Reeve nearly dropping the phone with it, Callum's expression breaking open for the first time into something that looked almost like delight. The sound bounced off the chain link in the concrete wall and filled the enclosed space in a way that was designed to be filling, designed to tell anyone who heard it that the situation had a clear direction and a clear conclusion. Zara waited for it to finish. "There's 3 of us," Callum said, like he was explaining arithmetic to someone who had missed the lesson. "I see that," Zara said. Damon raised one hand, stopping the laughter. His expression sharpened into something more efficient. The performance register was good, but he had another one underneath it, Harder, more focused, the register of someone who has had to actually use force before and knows what the transition to that looks like. You've got nerve. His voice had dropped. I'll give you that. But nerve doesn't win. Numbers win. Strength wins. You've got neither. Zara scanned the court one final time. She had run the geometry of this space since she arrived at 314. She had it entirely. Reeves' distance from her left flank 11 feet. His phone hand was his right hand, which meant his balance was right-weighted, which meant a force applied to his right side would find less resistance than one applied to his left. Callum was positioned 5 feet from the door, which put him 14 feet from Zara. Big, but not a trained fighter, the bulk of someone who had been large for so long, that size had always been sufficient. Jordan Pierce moved predictably and telegraphed before contact. She knew this from watching him in the cafeteria. Damon, 10 feet in front of her. Confident, untrained in any formal sense. The coordination of someone who was naturally athletic, who had used physical size as currency for long enough that he had never had reason to develop technique. His left foot forward weight distributed toward his front leg, the instinctive stance of someone who leads with their right hand. She had one objective minimum necessary. The phrase from 3 years of training, the phrase that had been the wall, and the floor, and the ceiling of everything the program taught. Not maximum effective, not overwhelming force. Minimum necessary. End the situation. Preserve the option of everyone walking away under their own power. She had been holding this objective since she left the building that morning. Last chance, she said quietly. Damon's amusement faded. He stepped toward her. There's no one coming to save you. His voice carried the flat certainty of 2 years of uncontested authority. He spread his arms wide, a gesture that encompassed the court, the fence, the empty air. This is my court. My rules. He closed the remaining distance. His right hand came up, fingers reaching toward her collar. I'm a trained fighter, she said. The laughter erupted again, louder than before, Reeve wheezing, Callum doubling forward. Damon's smile stretched to its widest point, the fullest version of the expression, pure, unguarded contempt. His fingers closed around the fabric of her collar. His arm pulled back. 2 seconds. Her left palm rose and met his wrist. Not a strike contact, precise and total, her fingers wrapping the joint with the grip that 3 years of drilling had built into her, until it was not a technique, but a reflex. A rotation. Degrees only 5, maybe 7. Applied to the exact anatomical point where the leverage of the elbow becomes the leverage of the entire arm, where the body's own geometry turns against itself. Damon's elbow bent in the direction that elbows do not travel by choice. Not far enough to cause damage. Exactly far enough to override every other signal in his nervous system. His knees did not buckle because she forced them. They buckled because the body, when the elbow receives that particular message, has exactly one response, and that response is downward. His weight transferred and his legs followed, and his back met the concrete in a single controlled descent, the impact forcing air from his lungs in a sharp, involuntary sound. He was on his back looking at the gray October sky, and he had no idea how he had arrived there. 1 second. Reeve moved on instinct. The phone stayed in his left hand. He didn't let go of it, even in motion, the automatic priority of someone for whom documentation had become reflex. His right arm extended toward Zara from her left side. She was already turning. His wrist met her grip, the same rotation applied to the same joint, the same 5 degrees of pressure at the same anatomical point. His elbow locked straight, hyperextended just past its range of comfortable motion. Not broken, not close to broken, just precisely far enough into the range where movement means pain and stillness means the absence of pain. The phone slipped from his other hand. It fell 6 feet and hit the concrete screen first. The crack of it was the loudest sound that had happened in the court since the laughter. Reeve dropped to his knees, not because she had taken his legs, because kneeling hurt less than the alternative. 2 seconds complete. Callum took 1 step forward. He stopped. In the 14 feet between himself and Zara Cole, something had changed in the nature of the space. He was not a man who was good at articulating what he felt, but what he felt was this. The girl in the center of the court was not the girl who had stood in the center of the court 15 seconds ago. Or rather, she was the same girl, but something that had been underneath the surface of her had come to the surface. And what he saw when he looked at it directly made the step forward. He was already in the middle of complete itself as a step backward instead. 1 step, 2, 3. His shoulders met the chain link fence. The metal rattled once, a flat, hollow sound, like a note struck on an instrument that wasn't meant to make music. Silence. The kind of silence that has physical weight. The kind that presses against the ears and makes the heart beat louder. Damon lay on his back, breathing in the effortful way of someone whose body is trying to reconcile what just happened with everything it thought it knew about how the world was organized. His chest moved in rapid, shallow cycles. His eyes tracked the gray sky above the court, unfocused, searching. Reeve kneeled with his wrist held against his chest, frozen in the position of minimum pain, afraid to move in any direction because all directions led to more information about what happened when you moved. Callum was at the fence. Zara stood in the center of the court. Her hands had returned to her sides, open, visible. Her breathing was even. She stepped back from Reeve, created distance. Not retreat, just the precise calibration of space required by minimum necessary. She looked at each of them in turn. "I warned you," she said. Her voice was the same voice it had been before. Quiet, level, the tone of someone stating a fact about weather. "I told you exactly what I was." Damon pushed himself onto his elbows. From the ground, the angles were different, and Zara Cole looked different, taller than the geometry justified, more solid, as if the quiet transfer student he'd decided to make an example of had been a coat she was wearing over something else entirely, and the coat was still there, but the something else had stepped forward. "What was that?" His voice had the quality of a question that doesn't actually expect an answer because the person asking it has no framework into which an answer could be placed. He swallowed. Tried again. "What was that?" Zara moved to where Reeve's phone lay on the concrete. She picked it up. The screen was shattered along one full diagonal, but the recording application was still active, the red dot still blinking. She looked at the screen for a moment. She stopped the recording. "You filmed all of it," she said. She looked at Reeve, still kneeling, from the beginning. She turned the phone over in her hand, examined the damage to the screen, including the part where he grabbed me first, including the part where I gave all three of you the chance to walk away. Reeve's color had gone somewhere that wasn't his normal color. The implications were arriving in sequence, each one finding him still in the process of absorbing the previous one. Zara walked back to Reeve and extended the phone toward him. He looked at it like it was an object from a different physical universe. "Take it." He didn't move. "Take it," she said again. His hand moved forward with the trembling coordination of someone doing something their body is uncertain about. His fingers closed around the shattered phone. "Why would you let me?" "Because I didn't do anything wrong." She looked at him steadily. "He grabbed me. I defended myself. The video shows exactly that in exactly that order. If you post it, it shows exactly that to whoever watches it." She stepped back again. Looked at Damon, who had gotten himself to a sitting position on the concrete elbows, on knees, breathing in a more controlled way now, but still with the quality of someone recalibrating fundamental assumptions. "This is what you organize," she said. "You picked the time and the place. You announced it so everyone would know. You brought Reeve to film it." A pause. "Everything that happened here today, you built. You promoted it. You made sure everyone was watching." She let that sit for a moment. "Everything that happened in the last 2 minutes is on the same video you were planning to post tonight." Damon opened his mouth, closed it. The machinery of his usual response, the deflection, the aggression, the authority of someone who has never had to account for his words after he said them, ran through its sequence and found nothing usable at the end. The fire door opened. All four of them turned toward the sound. Ms. Caldwell stepped through. She took in the court with the practiced efficiency of someone who has spent 11 years learning to read the rooms she walks into. Damon breathing on the ground. Reeve on his knees, phone in hand. Callum against the fence. Zara standing alone in the center with her hands open and her breathing steady and her expression containing none of the things that were in everyone else's expressions. "Interesting gathering," she said. Her voice was exactly as level as Zara's. "Someone want to explain the tableau?" Damon found his voice first. "She attacked us." The words came out faster than the thought behind them, the reflexive sprint toward a narrative before the facts could solidify into something less manageable. "The new girl. She just started hitting people for no reason. She's dangerous. She's insane." Ms. Caldwell's right eyebrow moved approximately 3 millimeters upward. "Is that your account?" "We have proof." Damon's voice found some of its footing. He gestured toward Reeve. "Show her. Show her the video. Show her what she did." Reeve looked at the phone in his hand. His thumb hovered over the shattered screen. The video that had been recorded to document the public defeat of a girl who thought she knew martial arts was now something considerably more complicated than that. "Go ahead," Zara said. Reeve looked at her. Play it from the beginning, she said. Reeve played it from the beginning. Ms. Caldwell watched it without expression. The video ran 1 minute and 47 seconds. When it ended, she was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Damon. In that video, she said, I observe a student grab another student by the collar in an aggressive manner after issuing repeated threats over a period of several hours, some of which are documented earlier in this same recording. She took one step closer to Damon. I observed that student defend herself using the minimum force necessary to end physical contact. I observed no punches, no kicks, no injuries that will require medical attention. Another step. What I do not observe is an unprovoked attack. Damon's jaw worked. My father knows people on the school board. She'll be, your father does know people. Ms. Caldwell nodded once. I've spoken with some of them, over the years, in various contexts. A pause. I'd be interested in their reaction to this footage. To the part where the son of a prominent donor is documented grabbing a female student by the collar in front of a recording device he arranged to be present specifically so there would be documentation. The color left Damon's face in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Ms. Caldwell turned to include all three of them in what came next. Here is what happens now. The three of you walk back into the building. You go home. Tomorrow and every day after that, you make the choice to leave Zara Cole completely alone. You do not discuss today. You do not post, share, or reference any part of this recording on any platform. She looked at Reeve. Because if any version of today's events reaches anyone at administration, other students, the internet, I will ensure that the school board members your father knows see this recording in its complete and unedited form before anyone else gets to tell them what it means. Callum was already moving toward the door. Reeve followed, pocketing the phone with the movement of someone trying to make an object as small as possible. Damon stood. He brushed concrete dust from his jacket with the slow, deliberate movements of someone buying time for their expression to finish its reorganization. He did not look at Zara. He walked toward the fire door and stopped with his hand on the frame. This isn't over, he said, not a threat exactly. More like a man saying something because silence felt like surrender and he needed one more word before he left. Yes, Ms. Caldwell said calmly with the authority of someone who has been in this institution for 11 years and intends to remain. It is. The door closed. The sound traveled across the empty court and dissolved against the chain link. Zara and Ms. Caldwell stood in the flat afternoon light, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Somewhere beyond the fence, a bus pulled away from the front of the school, the diesel sound of it fading toward the residential streets beyond the campus. Normal life proceeding. Then Ms. Caldwell's phone buzzed on. She looked at it. Her expression did not change, but something behind her eyes did a small, specific adjustment, the face of someone receiving information they had been expecting and had been hoping was still a few hours away. The principal, she said. Zara looked at her. Damon called his father from the corridor. Caldwell's voice was still level, but the quality of the level had changed slightly. It was the level of someone maintaining a register they're working to hold rather than one that comes naturally. His father called the school. Administration wants both of us in the office. Zara looked at the fire door, then at the court. She had known on some level since the moment the door closed behind Damon Walsh that the next step existed. She had seen this machinery before. Different school, different hallway, different names in the chain of calls, but the same machinery running on the same fuel producing the same output. Power doesn't lose in the back court. Power reorganizes and reappears in the principal's office, in the formal language of policy and documentation, in the places where the person with the right phone contacts has advantages that no amount of training can redirect. I've done this before, she said quietly. I know. Last time they used the phrase mutual altercation. I know that too. Ms. Caldwell put the phone in her pocket. She looked at Zara directly. But last time you didn't have a video that showed who grabbed who first. And last time you didn't have 11 years of my memory and my files and every formal complaint I've been holding on to because I never had enough to act on. A pause. And last time you didn't have me. Zara looked at her. The sun was low now, just above the line of the gymnasium roof, the October light, that cold, pale gold that turns everything it touches into something slightly more serious than it is in summer. The chain link threw diamond shadows across the concrete. Somewhere in the building behind them, a phone was ringing in a principal's office, and a chain of calls was underway, and the machinery was running. I need you to trust me for a little longer, Ms. Caldwell said. It was not a demand. It was not a professional reassurance. It was something plainer than both the words of one person asking another person for something that mattered. Zara's right hand moved toward her left wrist, rested there for a moment over the bandage. She looked down at it, then she looked up. Last time someone said that to me, she said they meant trust the institution. I don't mean the institution. Ms. Caldwell held her gaze. I mean me. There is a difference. The wind moved through the court carrying the smell of October and wet concrete and the distant, ordinary world beyond the fence. 400 students were going home. Parents were in pickup lines. Tuesday was ending the way Tuesdays end. Inside the building, a phone was still ringing. Zara said nothing for a moment. Then she bent down and picked up her backpack, slung it over one shoulder, straightened up. Okay, she said. Ms. Caldwell nodded once. They walked toward the fire door together, and Zara pushed it open, and the alarm that had been disabled years ago by someone whose name nobody remembered said nothing at all as they stepped back into the building and the door closed behind them, and the back court stood empty in the last light of the afternoon. 2 seconds. That was all it had taken. The question that remained, the one that would not be answered in the back court, the one that would be answered or not answered in the hours that followed, was whether 2 seconds was ever going to be enough. In Zara Cole's experience, the hardest part had never been the 2 seconds. The hardest part had always been what came after. The still one part 3, what she chose to be. The hallway outside the principal's office at Jefferson High was painted the particular shade of institutional beige that someone at some point in the building's history had selected from a catalog of options designed to be inoffensive and had managed instead to be the color of waiting. It was the color of forms in triplicate and decisions made by people who weren't in the room and outcomes predetermined by factors that had nothing to do with what actually happened. Zara knew this color well. She sat in the chair closest to the wall, backpack on the floor between her feet, hands folded in her lap. The chair was the molded plastic kind that public institutions buy in bulk because they are cheap and because their discomfort is on some level part of the architecture of the space. You are not meant to be comfortable here. You are meant to be passing through, and the chair is the institution's way of reminding you of that. Through the closed door of the principal's office, she could hear a voice. Not words, just the register and rhythm of it. Male controlled the specific cadence of someone accustomed to making calls that produce results. She had been sitting here for 22 minutes. Ms. Caldwell was in the office. Zara was not. She had not been asked to come in yet, which was information. When institutions are deciding how to manage a situation, they prefer to finish the management before inviting the situation into the room. She understood this. She had sat in chairs outside offices before, and she had learned that the decisions made behind those closed doors arrive fully formed, with the language already chosen and the narrative already settled, and the purpose of inviting you in afterward is not to gather information, but to deliver a conclusion. She had been here before, not this hallway, this moment. She looked at the far wall. There was a bulletin board there covered with the usual institutional materials, a poster about the dangers of vaping, a color-coded schedule for winter sports tryouts, a reminder about the deadline for college application fee waivers printed in a font meant to convey urgency. Normal life documented and pinned at eye level. She looked at her hands. She thought about the voice behind the door and what it represented and how many times in how many rooms a version of this same voice had made a version of this same call and produced a version of this same outcome. She thought about the institutional arithmetic of it, not malice necessarily. Institutions don't require malice to produce bad outcomes. They only require the path of least resistance, and the path of least resistance almost always runs toward whoever holds more currency in the system. She thought about Marcus Webb, not the incident itself. She didn't replay the incident itself. She had made that rule 7 months ago, and she had kept it because keeping it was cheaper than the alternative. But she thought about the aftermath, the office, the voice behind the door, the counselor at the previous school who had come out with an expression that tried to be neutral and was instead the expression of someone carrying something they didn't want to be carrying. The language, mutual altercation, transfer agreement, the understanding that the school's liability ran in one direction and not in another, and that Zara Cole's continued presence at that institution was from an administrative perspective a problem that could be solved by her absence. She had not fought it. She had learned by then what fighting institutional machinery costs compared to what it produces. She had packed her things and come to Portland. The hallway was quiet except for the muffled voice through the door and the distant sound of a custodian's cart moving somewhere in the West Wing. The school was largely empty now. Most students gone, most teachers gone, the building settling into the particular quiet of a large structure in the process of being vacated. Footsteps. She heard them before she saw anything, a single pair unhurried coming from the direction of the main corridor. Not the quick, purposeful stride of someone going somewhere. The slower, uncertain rhythm of someone who has decided to do something and is still in the process of deciding whether they're going to go through with it. She did not turn her head. Sloan Merritt came around the corner and stopped when she saw Zara sitting in the chair outside the principal's office. She was carrying her backpack on both shoulders, and her jacket was unzipped, and her hair had come partly out of the way she'd had it that morning. She looked for a moment like someone who had been planning to knock on a door and had arrived to find the door already open. She stood in the hallway for 3 seconds. Then she walked forward and sat down in the chair next to Zara. They sat in silence. The muffled voice continued behind the door. The custodian's cart moved further away. "I looked for you after 6th period," Sloan said finally. Her voice was quiet, calibrated for the empty hallway. "Someone said you were still in the building." Zara said nothing, waited. "I know you don't know me. We've been in the same homeroom for 8 days, and I've never said a word to you." Sloane's hands moved on her lap, a small, unconscious fidget that she seemed unaware of. "I thought about it. I almost came over twice. My friend kept telling me not to get involved." "She was right," Zara said, not unkindly, factually. Yeah, she probably was. Sloan looked at the bulletin board across the hallway. "Damon took my lunch money for 6 months my freshman year. $20 a week starting in October, ending in April when I stopped carrying cash and started eating whatever I could buy with quarters from my locker." A pause. "I never said anything. My parents asked why I was losing weight, and I told them I was trying to eat healthier." The voice behind the door had stopped, then started again. "Everyone knew," Sloan said. "Not just about me, about all of it. The back court, the money, the way he made the lunch thing public if you tried to just not pay the group chats." She looked down at her hands. "I used to think if enough of us knew something would eventually happen, that the weight of everyone knowing would become too heavy to ignore." Zara understood this logic. She had believed a version of it herself once before she had understood how institutions actually worked and what knowing cost versus what acting cost. "But knowing is free," Zara said. Sloan looked at her. "Knowing doesn't require anything from you. It doesn't put you in a chair outside the principal's office. It doesn't give his father a reason to make a phone call." Zara kept her voice even. "Knowing is the thing people do instead of acting. That's not a judgment. It's just how the math works." Sloan was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said simply. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out her phone. She held it in both hands and looked at the screen without unlocking it. Then she looked at Zara. "When Callum dumped his tray on you at lunch," she said, "I was sitting in the far corner, far enough that nobody was watching me." She paused. "I recorded it. From the beginning. I've been carrying it around since 11:45 this morning, trying to figure out what to do with it." Zara looked at the phone. "There's something in it I don't think I knew I was recording," Sloan said. She unlocked the screen, found the video, held it out. Zara took it. The video opened on the cafeteria seeing Callum approaching with the tray, the deliberate angle of the pour. The red sauce, the crowd's silence, Zara's methodical response with the napkin, her departure through the crowd that parted without knowing it was parting. Clean documentation. The timestamp in the corner read 11:47, but the video continued past the cafeteria scene. Sloan had not stopped recording when Zara left. She had kept the phone angled while her eyes tracked Callum and Reeve and the students around them, and in doing so she had caught in the lower right portion of the frame a sight line through the cafeteria's secondary exit into the adjacent corridor, the corridor that ran between the cafeteria and the gymnasium wing. At 11:52, the timestamp showed 2 figures entering that corridor from the left side of the frame. Distance made them small, 15, maybe 20 feet from the camera, through the exit doorway, but the corridor itself was well lit, and the angle, though not direct, was not obstructed. Damon Walsh and Reeve Strand, moving with the specific purpose of people who are not simply passing through a space. A girl was already in the corridor, visible only from behind. She'd come from the gymnasium direction. She was carrying a backpack on one shoulder. She walked with even deliberate steps that Zara recognized. She recognized the jacket. She recognized the backpack. She recognized the particular set of the shoulders. The video showed Damon reach the girl and fall into step behind her, then close the distance and put his hand on her shoulder. The resolution at this range was not clean. The phone had been optimized for the cafeteria foreground, not this secondary view through a doorway, but it was sufficient. It was sufficient to see the shoulder. The hand. The moment the girl turned, the moment the hand released and Damon stepped back, The timestamp read 11:53. This was not the corridor encounter Zara had cataloged for 2:45 in the afternoon. This was a different corridor, a different time, the same hand. She handed the phone back. He'd been doing it all day, Sloan said quietly. Not just in the hallways where people could see, in the ones where they couldn't. Zara looked at the door to the principal's office. Ms. Caldwell needs to see this, she said. Sloan nodded. She looked at the phone in her hand with the expression of someone who has been carrying a thing for a long time and is now in the process of deciding whether to set it down. If I give her this, she said, I become someone who gave someone evidence. I become someone who was involved. Yes, Zara said. She did not soften it. Sloan deserved the accurate version. And Damon's father calls his lawyers and possibly. Sloan looked at her. Aren't you scared? Zara considered the question honestly, the way she considered most things fully, without the reflexive answer that would be easier to give. I'm always calculating, she said. I'm not sure that's the same thing. Sloan sat with this for a moment. Then she stood up and she straightened her jacket and she knocked on the principal's office door. What happened next did not happen quickly. Institutions do not reverse quickly. They do not pivot cleanly. They absorb new information the way large bodies absorb small forces with resistance, with the natural inertia of things that have been moving in one direction, with the preference of systems to continue being what they are, rather than become something different. Ms. Caldwell came to the door when Sloan knocked. She looked at Sloan. She looked at the phone Sloan was holding out. She took it and stepped back into the office, closing the door behind her. Zara sat in the hallway and listened to the quality of the silence change. There are different kinds of silence in institutional spaces. The silence of a waiting room where nothing is happening is flat ambient, the silence of held breath. The silence of a room where something is being reconsidered has weight to it, a different texture. The silence of positions being revised. 15 minutes passed. Zara sat in the chair and did not move. She thought about what Sloan had said, about knowing being free, about the way the weight of collective knowledge had failed to produce anything for 2 years, and about how one afternoon of something different had produced 3 phone calls, 1 video, 2 students sitting in a hallway outside an office. She thought about the program, about the facility in northern Washington with its gymnasium and its residential rooms and its daily schedule of therapy and training and the particular compound of skills it had built into her over 3 years. She thought about Dr. Patterson, who had run her therapeutic track and who had said at the end of Zara's 3rd year something that Zara had carried with her, the way you carry something that is too heavy to put down, but too useful to leave behind. Dr. Patterson had said the skills are tools. Tools don't have values. A hammer doesn't know whether it's building something or breaking something. That's the work of the person holding it. That's the only work that actually matters. Zara had understood this intellectually when Dr. Patterson said it. She was still learning what it meant in practice. The door opened. Miss Caldwell stepped into the hallway. Her expression had settled into something that was not quite relief and not quite satisfaction, the expression of someone who has been in a difficult room and has come out of it with something they needed, and who knows that having it does not mean the difficulty is over. I need to make 2 more calls, she said. There are 3 other students who came to my office earlier this afternoon. I need to reach them and ask whether they're willing to put their names on formal complaints. Zara looked at her. They came today, she said. They came after 3rd period. Ms. Caldwell held her gaze. Apparently word moves fast. A pause. They'd tried before, informally, without documentation, without believing it would go anywhere. She looked at Sloan, who was standing near the bulletin board trying to look like she was somewhere else. Today felt different to them. Zara thought about this. 3 students who had been carrying something for months or years, who had absorbed the weight of knowing while the machinery of the institution ran its regular course, and who had on this particular Tuesday walked into a counselor's office and done the thing that costs. She had not done it for them. She had walked into the backcourt for herself for the 8-day accumulation of mornings on which she had written, I don't run in her notebook and meant it. She had done it because running had a cost she'd paid too many times in too many cities and had decided somewhere between the city bus stop on Morrison and 18th and the front doors of Jefferson High that she was finished paying it. But intention and consequence are different things. What you mean to do and what you're doing produces in the world around you, those are different accounting ledgers, and they don't always reconcile. Go home, Miss Caldwell said to Zara. I'll call you this evening. What happens if it doesn't work? Miss Caldwell was quiet for a moment. The honest pause of someone deciding between the answer that is comforting and the answer that is true. Then we figure out the next step, she said. Together. That's not a guarantee. It's a commitment. Zara looked at her for a moment. She picked up her backpack, stood up. That's more than I've had before, she said. She walked toward the main exit, and the hallway carried her footsteps back in both directions, and somewhere in the building Miss Caldwell's phone was already dialing. The next morning arrived gray and cold, the way October mornings in Portland arrived not dramatically, just persistently. The sky, the color of old concrete, a dampness in the air that hadn't decided whether it was going to commit to rain. Zara's phone had rung at 8:47 the previous evening. Ms. Caldwell had spoken for 11 minutes. The substance of it was this: the 3 additional formal complaints had been filed and logged. Sloan Merritt's video had been reviewed by administration in the presence of Ms. Caldwell and the school district's student affairs coordinator, who had been called in specifically because the involvement of a school board-connected family required oversight above the building level. The video from Reeves Strand's phone had been subpoenaed through the school's digital documentation policy, which allowed administration to request footage recorded on school property during school hours for the purposes of a formal investigation. Damon Walsh had been placed on a 3-day suspension pending the outcome of the investigation. His father had made additional calls. Ms. Caldwell had said in the flat, precise tone of someone reading from a document that the district's student affairs coordinator had informed the Walsh family attorney that the existence of 2 separate video records documenting unprovoked physical contact initiated by their client made the district's liability exposure run in one direction and not another, and that proceeding with any action against Zara Cole would require the district to enter into public record materials that the Walsh family might prefer remain unscrutinized. The family attorney had called back 40 minutes later. The action against Zara Cole had been withdrawn. Ms. Caldwell had said this without editorializing. She had simply reported the sequence of events in order, and she had ended the call with, "I'll see you tomorrow, Zara. Room 214 at some point during the day when you're ready." Zara had sat on the edge of her bed for a while after that. She had thought about what Damon's father withdrawing looked like from the outside, the clean resolution, the machinery reversing itself, the institutional outcome that appeared at first accounting to resemble justice. She had thought about what it actually was, which was not justice, but arithmetic. A calculation made by a family attorney about the cost-benefit ratio of proceeding versus withdrawing a calculation that came out in her favor, not because the system had weighed her experience and found it worth protecting, but because the evidence had made proceeding expensive. Not justice. But sometimes it's as close as you get. She had understood this. She was 17, and she had understood this completely and without self-pity, and the understanding had not felt like defeat. It had felt like clarity, the kind of clarity you earn by paying for it. She had set her alarm and gone to sleep. Now she walked the 2 blocks from the bus stop on Morrison and 18th to Jefferson High in the gray October morning, and the campus looked the same as it had every other morning. Cars in the lot, buses at the curb, the security guard near the main entrance looking at his phone, the particular Tuesday morning energy of 500 people converging on a space they would rather not be converging on at this hour. She walked across the parking lot. She did not note the position of Damon Walsh's car because he was not there. She did not scan the side entrance where he had stood that first morning with Reeve and Callum in their formation. She did not calculate the sightlines or map the exits or build the file on who was positioned where in relation to her trajectory. She just walked. She was through the front doors before she fully registered that she hadn't done any of it. The mapping, the cataloging, the instinctive risk assessment that had been the ambient layer of every walk across every parking lot for 3 years. She'd just crossed the lot and entered the building the way a person enters a building purposefully without a security protocol running underneath. She stopped just inside the doors, stood still in the flow of students moving past her, let herself notice what had just happened. It had lasted approximately 40 feet. One parking lot crossing. It was not a recovery, not a cure, not the end of anything. Tomorrow morning, the mapping might be back. Next week, it might be louder than it was today. She knew this about herself with the honesty of someone who had been in therapy long enough to understand the difference between progress and resolution. But this morning, for 40 feet, she had just walked. She moved to her locker, worked the combination without looking at it, opened the door. The note was folded, once placed in the center of the shelf where she kept her first period books. Small square, the kind of fold that suggests it was done carefully, the way you fold something you want to arrive in good condition. She picked it up. 6 words in careful handwriting. Thank you for standing up. No name, no signature. She read it twice. Then she folded it back along its original crease and placed it in the front pocket of her jeans next to her phone. She stood at the open locker for a moment and looked at the empty shelf. The hallway moved around her, lockers slamming, conversations overlapping, the general velocity of a school morning, doing what school mornings do. She had been in this building for 9 days. She did not yet know most of the names attached to the faces she passed every day, and most of the faces did not know hers in any way beyond the shape of what had been moving through the halls since Monday of last week, the new girl, the quiet one, the one that something happened with behind the gymnasium yesterday. The story would travel and mutate and produce 15 different versions of itself by end of day. She had no control over that and had stopped wanting control over it. She closed her locker and turned. Sloan Merritt was standing 6 feet away, not approaching, just there, backpack on both shoulders, having arrived at some point in the last 30 seconds at a distance that wasn't accidental. "Hi," Sloan said. "Hi," Zara said, a pause. Not uncomfortable. The pause of two people in the opening seconds of something that doesn't yet have a name. "I wrote it," Sloan said. "I know," Zara said. Sloan blinked. "How, the handwriting? You signed a note in class last week when Mr. Harris asked us to pass forward our names for the seating chart." Zara looked at her. "Same ease." Sloan stared at her for a moment. Then something in her face loosened, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "That's unsettling," she said. "I know," Zara said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." Sloan shifted the weight of her backpack. "Mr. Caldwell called my parents last night about the video, about filing the complaint." A pause. "My mom cried, which was a lot to deal with at 9 in the evening." "How was your dad?" "He wanted to drive to Damon Walsh's house." "Also a lot to deal with." "Yeah." Sloan looked toward the main corridor, then back. "Ms. Caldwell said there are 3 other kids who filed. I don't know who they are yet. She said she'd tell us once the investigation is formally opened." Zara nodded. "Is it strange," Sloan asked, "that it took all of this, that it took you walking into that court yesterday for people to feel like they could say something?" Zara thought about this honestly. "It doesn't take a hero," she said. "It takes a first. Someone has to go first. And whoever goes first pays a price that the people who come after don't pay. That's not a complaint. That's just the actual structure of it." Sloan was quiet. "I didn't go first because I wanted to be anyone's first," Zara said. "I went because I was done running. Those are very different things." "But it mattered anyway," Sloan said. "Yes," Zara said. "It did." The first bell rang. The hallway velocity increased, bodies moving toward classrooms, the institutional rhythm resuming. Zara closed her locker. Sloan fell into step beside her, which was not something that had happened in 9 days of mornings. It was Zara recognized the beginning of something. She didn't have language for what exactly. She had not had a great deal of practice with beginnings that were not also assessments of threat, but she recognized the shape of it, the way two people who have been in the same space without connecting step sideways into the same trajectory and find it natural enough to sustain. She let it happen. They walked to first period. The school looked different at 3:15 on Wednesday. Not physically. The hallways were the same, the lockers the same, the institutional beige, maintaining its determined neutrality. But the atmosphere of a place is not located in its walls. It lives in the behavior of the people inside them, in what they do in the corners and corridors, and the quiet spaces between structured activity. Damon Walsh was not in the building. His suspension had begun that morning. Reeves Strand, who had spent 2 years as the media infrastructure of Damon's operation, was sitting with the drama club at lunch. He was laughing at something one of them said, and the laugh was real, slightly too loud, in the way of someone who is not yet certain of the terms of this new arrangement and is working hard to belong to it. He had put his phone in his pocket when Zara walked past the table and had not taken it out again. Callum Briggs was at the football table, as large and physically present as he had always been, occupying the same institutional space with the same body, but somehow less of it, the way presence decreases when the structure that gives it meaning collapses. He had pressed himself against the lockers that morning when he saw Zara in the hallway, 1 step, then 2, giving her maximum clearance, his eyes tracking the floor. She had not acknowledged him. She had passed him and continued to class and thought about the specific architecture of power and how quickly it could be evacuated from a structure that had seemed permanent. 2 years and then 1 afternoon, and by Wednesday morning, the hallway behavior had already begun to reorganize around the new map. That is how power works in closed systems. It is not evenly distributed or structurally fixed. It pools toward whoever the system has decided to allow it to pool toward, and when that allowance is withdrawn by evidence, by documentation, by the presence of enough people willing to put their names on a piece of paper, it disperses. Quickly, without ceremony. The freshman who had been surrendering lunch money walked past Damon Walsh's usual table without a second glance. The table was empty. Zara was at her locker after the last bell when she saw through the window at the end of the corridor the shape of someone on the bench at the edge of the campus. The waiting bench, the one near the sidewalk where students sat when their rides were late, the bench that on any given afternoon would have 3 or 4 students orbiting Damon Walsh while he held court over whatever the afternoon's transaction was. One person, sitting alone. She went through the front doors. The afternoon was cold, the dampness from the morning still present in the air, the light flat under a sky that had committed to cloud cover without committing to rain. The parking lot was emptying, cars pulling out, buses gone, the campus returning to itself after the daily occupation of 500 people. She walked toward the bench. Damon Walsh was sitting with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the ground in front of him. He looked up when she was 10 feet away. He did not stand, did not change his posture, did not reach for any of the registers he'd been using for 2 years in every interaction with every person in this building. He looked at her and then looked back at the ground. She sat down on the opposite end of the bench, a full 4 feet of space between them. She set her backpack down, looked at the sidewalk. The street beyond the campus was quiet, a few cars passing the ordinary residential world of a Wednesday afternoon in Portland, conducting its business. "I'm not going to say sorry," Damon said. His voice had a different quality than any voice she'd heard from him before. Not the pleasant, controlled cruelty of the hallway version, not the confrontational register of the back court. Something flatter, stripped of performance. The voice of someone sitting on a bench without an audience talking to a person they have given up trying to manage. "I didn't ask you to," Zara said. Silence. The cars passing. A bird somewhere in the oak at the far end of the campus doing something brief and then stopping. "I'm going to leave you alone," he said, "for the rest of the year. I'm going to leave everyone alone." He paused. "I know that doesn't fix anything." "No," Zara said, "it doesn't." He nodded once like a man receiving a sentence he considers fair. "My dad's a lot less useful than he used to be," he said. The tone of it was not self-pity. It was closer to something being said out loud for the first time because there is no longer any particular benefit to keeping it inside. Apparently, the school board members he knows don't want to be associated with this. Bad optics. He looked at his hands. "He said I embarrassed the family." Zara said nothing. "He's been saying that since I was 11. Damon's jaw moved. "I used to think if I was impressive enough, visible enough, in charge of something visible enough, I'd stop hearing it." He looked briefly at the sidewalk. Didn't work out. Zara sat with this for a moment. She thought about institutions, about fathers who taught sons that the absence of being pushed back was the same thing as strength, about how that lesson propagates from the man who learned it to the boy who absorbs it from the boy, to the hallways where he practices it on everyone within reach, from those hallways into the shape of a school that has learned to look in a different direction, because looking directly at it requires response. She thought about how Damon Walsh at 18 had a father who made calls, and about how that father had made at least one call to at least one other school that had produced at least one outcome that had cost Zara more than it had cost anyone else in the chain. She was not ready to say this to him. She was not certain she would ever be ready. Some truths are not therapeutic to deliver. Some accounting is best done privately in the ledger you keep for yourself. "The way you were raised doesn't excuse what you did," she said, "but it does explain some of it." He looked at her sidelong. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No," she said. "It's supposed to be accurate." He absorbed this. "What do you do now?" he asked. After a moment, "When everyone in the school knows what happened, when you can't just be the quiet girl in the corner anymore." She had been thinking about versions of this question since she sat outside the principal's office the day before, since Ms. Caldwell had called with the news about the suspension and the withdrawn action and the formal investigation, since she had walked into the building this morning without mapping exits. "I figure out what I want to be instead," she said, "instead of what—" She looked at the street. "I was trained to manage situations, to assess and contain and use minimum force to produce the least damaging outcome. That's a real skill. It's useful. I don't want to pretend it isn't. But it's not a life." She looked down at her left wrist. The bandage was still there, small and white, beginning to lift at the edge, where it always began to lift toward the end of the day. You spend long enough managing situations and you stop existing inside them. You become a function, a tool that processes events. She paused. I came here to learn to be in a room without processing it. Damon looked at her. How's that going? He asked. Something in her face shifted. Not a smile exactly, something less practiced than a smile, the involuntary movement of a muscle that doesn't get used often enough to be controlled. This morning I walked across the parking lot, she said. I wasn't counting exits. He looked like he didn't fully understand the significance of this. For me, she said, that's a lot. He nodded slowly, looked at the sidewalk. A car pulled up to the curb in front of the bench. A dark sedan with the particular waiting quality of a car that arrives because it was called, not because the driver chose to come. Through the window, she could see a man in a jacket who was looking at his phone rather than at the bench. Damon looked at the car. He stood up. He was taller standing than he'd seemed sitting, the size returning to him now that he was vertical, but it was different than it had been in every other interaction. The same body carrying a different load. He picked up his bag. He did not look at Zara when he said it. He said it toward the street. For what it's worth, he said, you were right about the consequences being real. A pause. I'd never actually had any before. He walked to the car and got in. The car pulled away from the curb and merged with the afternoon traffic and disappeared around the corner, and the bench was empty, except for Zara. She sat for a moment longer. She looked at the empty street. She thought about what she had said to him and what he had said back, and she thought about whether she was glad she had sat down. Whether it had been the right thing or just the thing she had done. Those were different questions, and she didn't have clean answers to either of them. She thought about the anonymous note in her pocket. 6 words. She took it out and read it again. Thank you for standing up. She folded it back along its crease, put it in her pocket. She stood up, shouldered her backpack, and walked toward the campus. The backcourt was visible through the gap between the main building and the gymnasium. She could see the corner of it from this angle, the edge of the chain-link fence, the shadow of the broken hoop against the gymnasium wall. She had intended to walk past it. She had told herself sitting on the bench that there was no useful reason to go there again tonight, that the geography of yesterday had produced what it produced, and there was no additional accounting to be done there. But she walked toward it anyway. Not as management, not as reconnaissance, just to see it. She came around the corner and stood at the edge of the space. The fire door was closed. The concrete was cracked and the hoop was bent, and the weeds were pushing through the gaps in the surface the way they always were, the way they'd been for years before yesterday and would be for years after. The chain link threw the same diamond shadows it always threw in this light. The gymnasium wall was the same gymnasium wall. It looked ordinary. It looked like what it was, 60 by 40 feet of neglected concrete behind an American public school that hadn't been repaired since the previous decade, exactly as forgotten and exactly as unspectacular as every other forgotten corner of every other institution that has decided certain spaces are not worth maintaining. 2 seconds had happened here. Not a battle, not a confrontation in any Hollywood sense of the phrase. 2 seconds of applied training producing the minimum necessary outcome. 3 people who walked out under their own power. A video that told the accurate story. A counselor who arrived exactly when she said she would. It had been, from a tactical perspective, a fairly clean execution of something she had practiced hundreds of times in a gymnasium in northern Washington. What it had not been was the end. She understood that. The investigation was open and would run its course, and the course it ran would depend on factors she could not control: the school board, the district coordinator, the Walsh family attorney, calculating expenses in an office somewhere in Portland, the particular institutional temperature of Jefferson High on any given week. There would be more mornings, more hallways, more situations requiring management. But there would also be Sloan Merritt falling into step beside her this morning. There would be the note. There would be Ms. Caldwell's voice at 8:47 the previous evening, saying the word together with the straightforwardness of someone who means it as a commitment and not as a phrase. She stood at the edge of the court and let herself feel the weight of the day she'd had, and the weight of the 7 months before it, and the weight of the 3 years before that. Footsteps. She did not turn. She had heard Miss Caldwell from 40 feet, the particular rhythm of someone who knew she would find Zara here, and had decided to come anyway. I thought I might find you here, Miss Caldwell said. She stopped beside Zara at the edge of the court. They stood together, looking at the space without speaking for a moment. How did it feel? Miss Caldwell asked. Today, the whole of it. Zara thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. I ate lunch, she said, and I didn't map the exits. Miss Caldwell looked at her. Twice, Zara said. Lunch and after sixth period in the courtyard. A pause. I also found the note in my locker. Sloan. Sloan. Miss Caldwell nodded. She looked at the court. The shadows were longer now, the afternoon committed fully to its late stage, the light, the deep flat gold of October at 5 o'clock. The formal investigation opens Thursday, she said. The district coordinator has the complaints in both videos. Damon Walsh won't be back until Monday pending the outcome. A pause. His father made 2 more calls this afternoon. Fewer people answered than he expected. Zara said nothing, filed it. What I want you to understand, Ms. Caldwell said, is that none of this means the system worked. The system is what produced 2 years of this. The system is what produced a quarter with no cameras and a back court with no oversight, and a principal who knew and looked in a different direction. Her voice was even, carrying no bitterness, the tone of someone describing the actual structure of things because the person next to them is owed accuracy. What worked yesterday was you, and Sloan, and 3 people who had been waiting for someone to go first. That's not the system, Zara said. No, it's not. Ms. Caldwell looked at her. The system is what you navigate when you're trying to do something the system wasn't designed to help you do. You navigate it by knowing exactly what it is, not by believing it's something better. Zara looked at the bent hoop in the last of the afternoon light. I've been in programs and institutions and schools for 3 years, she said. I know what they are. You also know what they're not, Ms. Caldwell said. You know they're not the people in them. The system didn't show up outside this door yesterday, I did. Zara was quiet for a moment. Why? She asked. It was a genuine question. Not skeptical, not rhetorical. Just the honest inquiry of someone trying to understand the exact shape of the thing that had happened. Because 11 years in an institution that looks the other way is long enough to understand what looking directly costs, Ms. Caldwell said. And because you walked in here 9 days ago and sat in the back corner of every room and carried everything you carry and didn't ask anyone for anything. She paused. That kind of carrying deserves witness. The wind moved through the court steady from the northwest. Zara looked at her left wrist, the bandage lifting at the edge, as it always did this time of day. She thought about Dr. Patterson in northern Washington, saying the skills are tools, and about the girl she'd been at 14 who arrived at a facility with nothing except the vigilance that abuse builds into a body, and about the 3 years of work that had turned the vigilance into something with precision and restraint and the understanding of when not to act. And she thought about the 40 feet of parking lot this morning. I want to be normal, she said. I know it's not a realistic, it's a reasonable thing to want, Ms. Caldwell said. I want to eat lunch without counting exits. I want to walk through the hallway without the file running. I want to, she paused. I want to make a friend without the threat assessment happening underneath it. Those are good things to want. Are they possible? Ms. Caldwell was quiet, the honest pause of someone who respects the question enough to give it a real answer. I don't know, she said. I think the training becomes less loud over time. I think you've already shown today that there are mornings when it quiets down, whether it quiets down completely or whether it becomes something you carry differently rather than something you stop carrying. She looked at Zara. I don't know, but I think the answer is somewhere in the living, not in the avoiding. The light was going now, the court settling into the early dark of an October evening, the chain-link fence fading into shadow, and the gymnasium wall going gray. I should go home, Zara said. Yes, Miss Caldwell said. Neither of them moved immediately. Miss Caldwell, Zara said, thank you for yesterday, for tonight, for being, she stopped, reconsidered, for showing up. Room 214, Ms. Caldwell said. Whenever you need it, you don't need an appointment, you don't need a reason, you just need to walk in. Zara picked up her backpack. She walked toward the fire door and pushed it open and stepped into the building, and the hallway received her familiar beige institutional, the same as it had been every other evening she'd stayed late and the door closed behind her. She walked through the building and out through the main doors and across the parking lot, her breath visible in the cold evening air, her footsteps steady on the asphalt. She was not counting exits. She was not mapping the terrain. She was not running. She walked 2 blocks to the bus stop on Morrison and 18th and stood under the shelter with 3 other people and waited for the bus, and when it came, she got on it and found a seat and sat with her backpack on her lap and watched Portland pass by the window in the evening streetlights coming on storefronts lit the residential neighborhoods with their porch lights and their parked cars and their Wednesday evenings already underway inside. Normal life. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unsaved number. She opened it. It's Sloan. I got your number from the homeroom list. I hope that's okay. I was wondering if you wanted to get coffee tomorrow morning before school. There's a place 2 blocks from campus. You don't have to say yes. I just thought I'd ask. Zara read it twice. She looked out the window at the passing city. Then she typed yes. What time? She put the phone back in her jacket pocket. Her right hand passed near her left wrist as she did the bandage there lifting at the edge, the way it always did by evening. She looked at it for a moment. For the first time in 7 months, she thought about not replacing it. Not yet. Not tonight. But the thought existed where it hadn't existed before, which was its own kind of information. She looked back out the window. The bus moved through Portland in the early dark of an October evening, carrying her away from Jefferson High and toward the apartment where she would eat dinner and do homework and set her alarm for tomorrow morning. Carrying her toward the coffee place 2 blocks from campus and the morning that would come after this one and the one after that. The cost of what she carried was real. It would remain real. But the man on the bench this afternoon had never faced consequences before, and now he had. And the 3 students who filed complaints had been waiting for a first, and now they had one. And somewhere in the school behind her, in a room with a bulletin board and molded plastic chairs, and the particular beige of institutional waiting, a woman who had spent 11 years watching kids survive was still in her office at 5:15 on a Wednesday working. And in Zara Cole's jacket pocket, folded along its original crease, were 6 words in careful handwriting. The bus stopped. She didn't get off. She stayed with the window in the city in the evening, proceeding at its regular pace. She thought about 40 feet of parking lot. She thought about what 40 feet could become. She watched Portland go by and she said nothing. And she waited for her stop, and outside the window, the streetlights held their ground against the dark, the way they always did, steady and ordinary, and exactly where they were supposed to be.